For more than half a century, the two Koreas have been separated by a heavily fortified border, a remnant of the Cold War. In the past decade, North Korea's nuclear ambition froze already icy relations between the two Koreas and seemed to throw North Korea deeper into isolation from the rest of the world. But things started to thaw in the year 2000 with the first ever South-North Korean summit. And just this past week, the second ever summit seemed to warm bilateral relations while drawing global media attention. On Arirang TV special Summit and Beyond, we interviewed leading scholars of Korea and asked about their assessments and prospects on North Korea.
제가 다녀오면 또 더 많은 사람들이 다녀오게 될 것입니다. 그러면 마침내 이 금단의 선도 점차 지워질 것입니다. 장벽은 무너질 것입니다.
For our first interview, we meet with Professor Moon Jung-in, an authority in inter-Korean relations who is one of the few who have been included in both summit delegations, once back in 2000 and then in 2007. We are happy that he can join us today.
First, the declaration presents an overall blueprint for economic community on the Korean Peninsula with very detailed implementation project. Therefore, I would argue that the second summit has paved way for the building of Korean economic community. Second, as a way of enhancing common prosperity, the two leaders were able to bring peace in a virtuous circle with common prosperity. And I think that's very significant. And particularly, there was complementary progress between six-party talk processes and inter-Korean summit talks. And also there was a very in-depth discussion on the possibility of transforming armistice agreement regime into peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. At the same time, both leaders have agreed various military confidence building measures between two Koreas. And finally, by agreeing to hold summit talk frequently and Prime Minister level talks and Deputy Prime Minister level talks and inter-Korean defense minister talks, the second summit talk was able to lay the foundation for more institutionalized pattern of exchange and cooperation between the North and the South. You can simply compare the June 15 joint declaration of the first summit and the declaration on inter-Korean relations and peace and prosperity. You can come up very simple in the findings. First, the first summit was more general, comprehensive, and to some extent abstract and symbolic. While the second summit has given us more detailed picture of future cooperation between the North and South. And it has also given very concrete ideas and projects for enhancing inter-Korean relations.
You've been to North Korea twice, once in 2000 and then again in 2007. From your personal experience and first-hand experience, I wonder what it was like.
I think there was a qualitative difference between the first and second summit in terms of reception. During the first summit talk, President Kim Dae-jung was received by Chairman Kim Jong-il at the Sunan airport. And then they rode across the street of Pyongyang and went all the way directly to Baekhawan State Guest House. But second one is different. North Korea organized a massive welcoming ceremony at the heart of Pyongyang in front of the April 25th Cultural Center. It is very significant. In the middle of Pyongyang, more than 100,000 people showed up welcoming and cheering South Korean leader. In terms of qualitative in emphasis, I would say that the second summit drew more reception and welcome than the first one. But I would say that the first summit was more enthusiastic because it was the first summit since the division of the nation in 1945. But in the case of second summit, it was much more calm, pragmatic, practical. In the sense, there's some difference, but in terms of anticipation of North Korean people, there was greater enthusiasm and hope for the successful outcome of the second summit. Trust building is the most important virtue through which we can build truly improved inter-Korean relations. If we do not overcome the existing trust gap, we cannot be optimistic on the future of the Korean Peninsula. In this regard, we should keep in mind that positive reinforcement and optimistic attitudes should be the driving forces of inter-Korean relations.
지금은 어렵지만요. 우리나라랑요, 북한이랑 이제 서로 교류하면서 많은 이해를 했으면 좋겠어요.
이번 정상회담으로 이렇게 남북 간의 교류가 좀 더 활발했으면 좋겠고, 이번을 계기로 문화적인 차이가 많이 줄고 이렇게 서로 간에 이해할 수 있는 그런 폭넓은 기회가 되었다고 생각합니다.
원래 이게 백두산을 가려면 중국으로 돌아도 불편하게 가야 되는데 정상회담을 통해서 이제 쉽게 갈 수 있으니까 잘 됐으면 좋겠고요. 통일도 빨리 됐으면 좋겠어요.
I think the most important thing about the summit is not any particular result, but the ongoing development of inter-Korean relations. The declaration that came out of the summit had a lot of high-sounding goals, but not a lot of practical means for achieving those goals. That's going to lay with future administrations. But that was true of the first summit between Kim Dae-jung and Kim Jong-il. The development of inter-Korean relations is a long-term process. It's not going to happen in a week of talks. It's not going to happen even in terms of years. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. In terms of the US reaction, the Bush administration has been making positive statements about what's gone on, is supported the talks and has made positive statements about what's going on at the talks.
As President Roh Moo-hyun and North Korean leader Kim Jong-il were wrapping up their summit, there was some headway from Beijing. In the six-way talks, North Korea reaffirmed its commitment to declare and disable its nuclear facilities by year's end, and Washington, for its part, agreed to consider removing the North from its list of terrorism-sponsoring countries. What does this actually mean?
Taking North Korea off the terrorism list is very important because it opens up the prospect for aid from international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, and it makes it much more easy for North Korea to get financial aid and investment from Western countries who are reluctant to trade with North Korea as long as it's on the terrorism list because they face possible sanctions from the U.S. It's significant to North Korea that the United States take it off its terrorism list also because it's simply one of the signs that the United States is beginning to end its policy of hostility, as North Korea calls it. From the American perspective, the number one issue with North Korea is denuclearization. Inter-Korean issues are much less important to the United States than denuclearization of North Korea. This is the most important thing in American policy, whether you're liberal or conservative. It's getting the nuclear weapons out of North Korean hands. The agreement to disable is part of a long-term process. The next step would be to dismantle their nuclear weapons producing facilities, and then finally to dismantle their existing nuclear weapons. So this is one step in a several step process of denuclearizing North Korea. The current agreement says that North Korea will complete disablement by the end of this year. Now, I'm doubtful that it will actually happen by the end of this year. North Korea has missed almost every deadline in these negotiations, and in fact, in the previous agreed framework, the United States and South Korea missed many deadlines too. So the deadlines seem to be made to be broken, but the very fact that they've agreed in the past has usually meant eventually they have carried through on their agreement, just not at the date they agreed. North Korea still feels threatened by the United States, and the degree to which the fear that North Korea feels about the U.S. can be dispelled by an overall relaxing of tensions, that's good. I think that's the overall relaxing of tensions that comes from this summit process kind of spills over to the U.S.-North Korea relation as well. That's maybe the main benefit. I think in the United States there are different conceptions of what the U.S. interest in the region is, but I think the shared view is the denuclearization of the peninsula. That is the common view among any perspective in the United States. Liberal, conservative, realist, liberal, internationalist. So there's a common view that the nuclear issue has to be dealt with. Then there are different ideas about what the long-term strategic interest of the United States is in the Northeast Asian region, and particularly how Korea fits into that. There are those who want to maintain an American presence on the Korean Peninsula. There are those who have a more offshore balancing view, which says that bases in the region are less important than a trade in the region. So there are different points of view about the importance of military bases, for example. But overriding that kind of question is the nuclear issue. Well, I'm hoping that the institutionalization of this summit process continues. I think it would be good if there could be a regularization of summits so that each Korean president would have a summit with the corresponding North Korean leader. I don't know whether that's going to happen. You know, it's up to the next president of Korea whether he decides to follow the path that's been laid down at this particular summit or whether he takes a different approach. But it would be good to see further institutionalization of inter-Korean relations, not just at the summit level, but at a lower level officials. Not just even ministerial meetings, but levels below ministerial meetings becoming commonplace between North Korean officials and South Korean officials. This is, it would be important to see a broadening and deepening of inter-Korean ties, not just summits at the very top level. We have our hardliners in the United States, just like you have your hardliners in South Korea. I mean, there were people demonstrating against the summit here in South Korea. George Bush is the leader of the conservatives, mainline conservatives in the United States, and right now he is committed to negotiations. And he's satisfied right now with the progress in those negotiations. But we do have hardliners in the United States, just like in South Korea, who are worried that any aid or even any talks with North Korea only strengthens the North Korean regime. But right now, they don't have the power. Recently, Christopher Hill began negotiations with the U.S. Ambassador to the six-party talks, began negotiations with members of Congress to smooth the way for congressional support for lifting North Korea off the list of terrorist nations. So unlike in the past, the Bush administration is actively working with conservatives in Congress to get support for the ongoing negotiations and for the steps that will have to be made in the future to improve relations with North Korea.
네, 제가 보기에는 대북 사업과 경제 발전 쪽으로 많이 신경을 쓴 것 같은데 그런 쪽으로 영향을 많이 미쳤으면 좋겠고요. 뭐 그런 얘기는 전에도 많이 있어 왔지만 앞으로 정권이 바뀌어도 계속 긍정적인 측면으로 갔으면 좋겠어요.
정상회담을 통해서 우리 한반도가 평화적으로 좀 안정이 됐으면 좋겠다는 그런 생각이 들고 어떤 무조건적인 어떤 북한에 지원하는 것보다는 상호 보완적인 그런 측면을 좀 많이 고려해서 지원을 하고 또 국민적인 어떤 합의와 동의를 이루어야 될 부분 같은 것은 충분히 좀 고려해 주는 것이 좋겠다 이렇게 생각이 됩니다.
차제는 통일이 됐으면 좋겠고요. 지금 경제도 잘 협조를 해가지고 같은 민족이니까 같이 잘 살았으면 좋겠어요. 통일이 돼서.
I think it was a very necessary meeting. It's been 7 years since the first summit meeting, so in fact the meeting was overdue. Nevertheless, one could question whether the timing of the meeting was the most appropriate. We could have waited till next year, it's been overdue anyway, for a more significant meeting, the beginning of a new government in South Korea, and whatever deals are struck in Pyongyang would have carried more weight. Internationally, I think all 5 countries in the six-party talks, minus South Korea, watch with great interest to see if Chairman Kim Jong-il would come up with serious concessions. That didn't happen. We shall have to wait till the next full meeting of the six-party talks to see what steps North Korea takes after the summit meeting. With respect to what's been achieved, we shall have to see. You're right that the 8-point agreement were made, but North Korea has repeatedly agreed to this, since these kinds of agreements, since 1972 when the first talks were held, definitely in 1991 when the two Koreas agreed to denuclearize, and since then. Even in 2000, they agreed to a lot of things. We shall have to wait and see to make sure that North Korea is serious this time. The agreement to link rail lines is a very good thing if it happens. The agreement to open up Baek-Dusan to South Korean tourists and to open up air routes, we shall have to see. It's partly, if it's successful, it could be the part of an open skies agreement between the two Koreas eventually. All of these things we shall have to wait to see.
There seems to be various interests involved among the neighboring countries. China, for its part, seems to be hopeful that the revitalized economic cooperation between the two Koreas will have a spillover effect into its development efforts, whereas Japan seems to be mostly concerned about resolving the age-old issue of the kidnapping of Japanese nationals decades ago. How do you think the outcome of the summit will influence our neighboring countries?
Very good question. I think you're right. China is reasonably satisfied with the outcome of the summit. And of course, China looks forward to greater stabilization in North Korea internally, politically, socially, and economically. And if further assistance and investment into North Korea flows in from South Korea, it's bound to have a triggering effect in increasing demand for Chinese parts and products. So China looks forward to the day when trade becomes normalized with North Korea, not just by South Korea, but everybody else. And the northeast of China will likely benefit from any economic recovery or boom in North Korea. Japan, as you put it, is more cautious, but we have to remember that the Japanese government change just in the past couple of weeks. The new government hasn't had time to really react to what's happening in recent weeks in between the two Koreas. Nevertheless, I think that you're right, that Japan's foremost concern is their kidnapped citizens that North Korea hasn't come clean about. And they would like to see progress on this, obviously, before they commit anything to North Korea. I don't think it will have a direct result to America's deliberations. I think the executive branch of the U.S. government, together with Congress, will have to evaluate North Korea's actions. I think, first and foremost, to be removed from that list, North Korea has got to come clean on its past activities, as well as remove barriers to inspections of its nuclear facilities, and keep to the letter as well as the spirit of the agreement in between the U.S. and North Korea with respect to denuclearization. It's hard to tell. I'm not a fortune teller. Nevertheless, I think certain things are very clear. For real progress to be made in between the two Koreas, North Korea's leader, Mr. Kim Jong-il, as well as the leadership group in Pyongyang, the military, the party cadres, North Korea's elite have to realize that their past paradigm is no longer effective. They have to realize that neither the United States nor South Korea, nor China, Japan, or Russia, nobody threatens the survival of North Korea. They alone can determine whether they are going concern or whether they will collapse. I think they have to improve dramatically their human rights situation. I think they have to improve dramatically in terms of giving greater social freedom to their population, without which no economic progress is really possible. I think they have to be very, very clear about their commitments. International society depends on norms and agreements that are kept by states. North Korea has to change its behavior internationally. Once it decides to do that, then everything that they want, economic progress, better living standards, a future becomes possible.
정상회담은 시기적으로 적절한 시기에 이루어졌다고 생각을 해요. 그러나 그 내용 면에서는 우리들이 좀 더 실리 추구하는 그런 면보다는 남북이 공동 이익을 추구하는 그런 면에서 이루어져야지.
그래서 아무래도 이제 통일이겠지만요. 일단은 그 통일 이전에 너무 또 이렇게 교감이라든가 너무 이렇게 그러니까 북한하고 우리 남한하고 모든 이렇게 생각하는 차이라든가 이상이 많이 틀리잖아요. 그게 우선적으로 많이 좀 공감대가 많이 좀 됐으면 첫 번째로 좋겠어요.
The 8-point agreement on October 4th is expected to boost the peace process in this region. Well, before the reunification of Germany, a total of 6 rounds of summit meetings were held, and experts say they became a watershed in closing the final chapter of the Cold War. It would no doubt be too hasty to talk about such a scenario for Korea, but there is no doubt that a series of meaningful summit meetings will eventually lead to the day when the two Koreas will no longer stand divided and come together as one.
In order to be a viable state, they have to change internally, change dramatically. And we are hoping that they will do it of their own volition, not because of outside pressure.
I think more important is the broadening and deepening of the process beyond summits, but it's going to take a long time. Koreans have to be patient.
I think that the second summit can be seen as a first step toward institutionalization of inter-Korean integration and unification. We can have high hope for the future of Korean unification as Germans did in early 1990s.